Hey everyone, I want to take a moment to do something a little different and talk about a classic album. Album that didn't come out recently, just an album that is very important in music history, in my opinion, to talk about. And today I want to talk about Daft Punk's debut album, Homework. And what else really hasn't been said about Daft Punk already? Pioneers in electronic music, dance music, house music. Sampling wouldn't be as prevalent if it wasn't for them. Their choices of samples are great. They've influenced musicians like Justice, who I'm a big fan of. What hasn't been said about them, it's very difficult to find a person who doesn't like at least one song by Daft Punk, as they are universally one of the most loved bands, and their breakup recently in the past couple of years was a big shock and very sad to a lot of music fans everywhere, including me. And I know I could have spoken about some of their more big albums. While their debut is big, it pales sadly in comparison in popularity to Discovery and Random Access Memories, and makes sense considering those two albums are monumental when it comes to dance, electronic music, house, everything I've said. But you wouldn't have those if you didn't have this debut album, which I think it's still loved by every Daft Punk fan, by music fans everywhere. But I want to give it some love that I don't think it rightfully gets, as this album just paves the way for what they would go on and shows. And while I'll levy out the main criticism, the album is incredibly long, and after about a little over the halfway point, you kind of lose a lot of the memorable songs, and all the other songs in the second half don't necessarily compare. They're not horrible, as there's not really a song on the album that I outright hate, but I do not find myself listening to the second half of the album. And while, yes, that is a major criticism, not something I believe an album like Random Access Memories has, the memorable songs on this album are amazing. And the only other real criticism I think I can levy to this album is it's not as conceptual as their other works. But that does not mean that you do not see a clear Daft Punk album, a huge direction that they're going towards. On, like, the opening song, Daft and Direct, which I might have pronounced that wrong, I apologize, just starts with this muffled vocal chant that it just carries the song throughout with this fast drum beat. Very just great to hear. You have Revolution 909, a very memorable Daft Punk song with these people like talking amongst each other like it's in a city, as you hear these police sirens building up and telling people like to stop the music and to go home, basically. And that carries on throughout the entire song as this sets up this like musical revolution. And I know beforehand I said this album is not as conceptual as their other albums. The one thing I can say about this album conceptually is it heavily kind of makes me feel like a musical revolution is going on. From the first song I just talked about to Revolution 909, it just very feels like this. And this album is heavily influenced and references music that from the past, such as disco, funk, soul, Raven club music, and even rock music. There is so much that they put into this album, and it's amazing to hear. You have a song like Defunk, which is probably one of my favorite songs on the album, with the super catchy warped guitars that are just super catchy, paired with these kick drums. It's just amazing to hear through it as it just kind of builds up and builds down, and it feels like you're being moved on like a journey throughout the song. Great to hear. Daft Punk, from the start, always had this ability to make catchy earworm music that you would just love, and I was here for it, and I love this album for that. And then you have Phoenix, which at first I wasn't really the biggest fan of Phoenix, like, because I believe I first heard it around middle school for me, and as I got older, it was a bit obvious when I explained the instrumentation, but it starts with this simple drum beat, very, very simple for a bit, and then it slowly keeps adding more and more layers, whether that be new layers to the drums, such as adding like just different cymbals, different all that stuff, and then following it with some keys and even some vocal samples as it builds up into this full instrumentation, similar to a phoenix rising from the ashes, which, you know, was a bit obvious, but I didn't get it at first. And the moment I realized that, I thought that was such a cool like concept for a song, and I love that song now. And then the most memorable song on the album, Around the World. if you haven't heard Around the World, stop the video and go listen to it. It's great. Has these great distorted bass and these disco keys, and then later on the song get these plucky, watery bass, and then this distorted vocal sample like a loop saying "Around the World," basically. Which, some people might say it gets a little too repetitive. I love it. I've heard this song hundreds of times. I think this song is one of the best songs Daft Punk have made, and they've made a lot of great songs, and they continue. And while no, this album is not their best album, as I can at least say there are two albums better than this one. They started strong, as this is an album that I feel like most electronic artists would be lucky if it was their best album. And this was only the start for Daft Punk. A great album, in my opinion. Yes, the second half is a lot weaker than the first half. It isn't as conceptual as some people would like in comparison to Discovery and Random Access Memories, but it's just great, and I feel like I'll just keep repeating that if I let this go on any longer. But, I'm not going to give it a rating, but, what can I say? It's a classic.